Today's video is dedicated to Saturn in the mysterious and often misunderstood 8th house. We will talk about the difficulties it brings as well as potential for possible integration. Let's take a look. My name is Anastasia. I'm a traditional Western astrologer and astrology teacher specializing in natal relationship predictive readings. My natal astrology course is launching in May. You can sign up at the link in the description. Before we dive in, if you enjoy my content and want to show your support, please leave me a like, a comment, and subscribe. Press that notification bell. You can also watch more of my videos that helps draw more attention, encourages my channel's growth. Additionally, there's another way to say thank you, and that is by buying me a tea, a coffee, a croissant. That option is available in a lot of countries, but not in all of them. Even if you're just sending me happy thoughts, I'm very appreciative for every single one of you who shows up and watches my video and shows your support. If you're craving more, if you're craving a one-on-one connection, you want me to look at your chart and discuss your personal patterns and signatures in your karmic chart, book a reading at anastasiadoesastrology.com. There are natal, relationship, predictive readings, astrocartography consultations. For that, you can book a natal chart and specify that that's what you want, as well as electional astrology. I elect dates for people's weddings and other important events. And my class is launching in May. It will last 12 weeks, meeting twice a week, helping you discover the unique signatures hidden in your natal chart, discover the blueprint of your soul, learn more about yourself, find self-acceptance, and improve your relationships with others. Join us. The spots are limited and you can still sign up. So thank you for listening to my announcements. I appreciate that. Oh, one last one. On my website, you can also find a variety of products I create. There are candles and oils. And for you guys, people born with Saturn in the 8th, I would love to highlight my moon products. They're Moon and Cancer oils. The candles have been sold out. And there is an almond moon candle. This candle is the biggest one I have ever made. If you see the usual size of my candles, this one is double the size. And it captures the empowered lunar energy, helpful for soothing your soul, creating stability, helping you manifest things, and finding peace and relaxation. So we're talking about Saturn in the 8th house. This video series, I've been sharing a lot of videos on Saturn through the houses. It is inspired by the book, Liz Green's book, titled Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil, because she breaks down Saturn through all the houses, talks about aspects, and so much more. And I found this book inspiring, and so I decided to make a series on it. So if you're wanting more, check out the book. But first of all, a little bit about Saturn. Saturn is the last visible planet. It is very dull and dim, and it marks the border between the visible and invisible realm. And so astrologically, it has also been the planet that represents borders and boundaries. And the boundaries can be limiting, and a lot of times that's why Saturn gets this negative reputation and fearful energy that a lot of people feel, where they think Saturn is going to block them and restrict them. And trust me, I know what that feels like as I'm filming this video. I have Saturn opposite my sun and about to square my moon, and that is not the fun energy to deal with. I'm just happy I'm getting one of each. But Saturn aspects are complex, and so they can feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. However, the boundaries and the borders are often necessary to protect us, right? Literally, I am currently also reading Anne Frank diary and, thinking back on the World War II and all the suffering that people have gone through, and how much more protected they may have had, perhaps have they been behind the boundary of like a safe, non-warring country, right? Of course, it was World War, so there wasn't really a lot of countries that were not completely involved, or at least a little bit involved. But anyways, the boundaries can be protective as the walls around you, the walls of your house that makes you feel safe and secure, the boundaries you have maybe with toxic colleagues that are trying to take advantage of your generosity. The boundaries can be really helpful and supportive. And Saturn carries that power and that sort of energy of helpful lessons, and it forces us to work hard at things, and it builds a lot of appreciation of what we do achieve in life once we do achieve it. And I'd like to read the quote by Liz Green that I have read in the previous videos. So if you've heard it again, you will know it by heart by the end of this series. But it goes as this: Saturn symbolizes a psychic process as well as a quality or a kind of experience. He is not merely a representative of pain, restriction, and discipline. He is also a symbol of a psychic process natural to all human beings, by which the individual may utilize the experiences of pain, restriction as discipline, as a means for greater consciousness and fulfillment. Saturn is connected with the educational value of pain and with the difference between external values, those which we acquire from others, and internal values, those which we have worked to discover within ourselves. So it's the greatest teacher. It's the planet that helps us understand and acknowledge the hardship we've been through, grow through it, and reach the most fulfillment. So we're going to talk about Saturn in the 8th house. If this is you, I would love to hear from you. It's always super helpful, not just for me, but for other audience members, because you can read and compare stories and decide what, how this describes you. If you have anything to add, that is great. Also, once again, for more personal look, book a reading at anastasiadoesastrology.com, and on there you can also sign up for my natal astrology course and study with me. So before we talk about Saturn in the 8th house, what is the 8th house? Oftentimes, 8th house gets this really dark reputation. It is known as the house of sudden events, ups and downs, surprises, twists, darkness, the house of death, right? So a lot of times it's a pretty scary house. I think together with the 12th, 8th, and 12th are like up there. And one might argue which one of them is the most malignant, right? Which one is the most difficult? It is the house of death, only in a way that it is the house of exchanges. And exchanges can be financial, they can be energetic, they can be material, they can be bodily. So the main kind of nature of this house, it's the house of energetic, financial, emotional, and physical exchanges, right? And then once you understand that, a lot more goes into it. So if we're thinking of death as a literal death, our body is a resource that is given to us when we're born, and eventually it's a debt that we will end up paying back. So if you're thinking of, physical death, as in like, you got this resource, you're paying it back, yes, it's here. But there are many kinds of death that can be under the umbrella of the 8th house. The end of a relationship, the end of a contractual agreement, sex, which also French hail it le petit mort, a little death. Sex is a little death, right? An experience of doing, what am I thinking? Like drugs that create religious ecstasy, and like drugs that, induce certain states, meditative states, or religious trances. There are a lot of experiences that can fall under that term of death. And then by default with death often comes rebirth. So more often than not, the death represented by the 8th house is not a physical death, but more like a spiritual, soulful, emotional death that is followed by an arrival of a phoenix, a new you being born, right? So as a house of exchanges, it is also the house of other people's resources and other people's money and other people's emotions, right? 8th house is opposite the 2nd house. So in the second house, we are all about our things. It's our resources, it's our bank statements, it's our values. And then in the eighth house, we deal with other people because it's the progression, right? In the first house, the baby is born, understands its body. In the second house, starts saying mine. And the third house starts talking, gets to talk to siblings. Fourth house understands where home is, gets closer to parents. Fifth house is place. Sixth house is work, school, labor, is cleaning the house. Seventh house is relationships. And the eighth house is the resources of that relationship, resources of the partner. And money, money and sex are both under the umbrella of the eighth house, and both are really kind of complex topics. That's why eighth house is considered the dark house. It's the house that doesn't make a traditional aspect to the ascendant. And a lot of times the topics of the eighth house can slip past our vision. So if you're thinking of the eighth house as like exchanges, right? Somebody lend you money, you forgot to pay them back, or you take longer to pay them back, or they start feeling like you're not taking it seriously. There are a lot of sort of difficult stigma and energy attached to money. So, the meaning of money, it of course can be a house of like the actual money exchanges, debts and taxes and insurance and inheritance and all the things connected to money that comes to you from other people. But it can also be it can also be a symbol of like emotional exchange. And that's why if in the second house you're dealing with like tangible money, your resources, in the eighth house you're dealing with more emotional interactions and exchanges that connect exchanges that represent emotional connections, I think. So eighth house is oftentimes considered to be the house of crisis. That's why there is that energy of sudden events. Once again, a lot of times interactions with other people, their even resources, their affection, their, what's the word when somebody sort of takes us under their wing? Their protection, let's say, but I think there's a different word for that. It will come to me later. But their kindness, if it's taken away from us, or if we've had some kind of resource, and let's say a woman is married to a guy and she's staying at home with children, and then they get divorced, and maybe in the divorce he takes the children away from her, and so it's chaotic, right? It's emotional, it's cathartic, it's a crisis point. And so in the eighth house, through these exchanges with other people, we find more freedom. We often go through some kind of struggle and we find freedom. So the eighth house can definitely be this place of like crisis, battleground, little deaths, sexual union as in exchange between people, right? Once again, it's like sex is rarely just a physical act. A lot of times it's a lot more emotional, and there's a lot more attached to it, right? It's an exchange. A lot of times people exchange sex for stability, right? Like getting married to someone, exchanging it sounds a little bit like, well, like, if somebody sells their body, that's a very obvious type of exchange. But then we all, there's an element of that. It's just a very complicated topic that people don't talk a lot about. But there is there's definitely a lot of exchanges, a lot of unspoken things represented by the sexual union. So what happens when Saturn comes into the eighth house? If we look at Saturn as the symbol of restriction, as Saturn as a symbol of like seriousness and sobriety. So oftentimes there may be a very sort of serious focus on relationships with other people, very like somber approach to things. A person with this placement may find themselves being, constantly maybe in a position to like pay for other people or be the one who's like responsible for other people financially. Like maybe you're saving money for your children to go to college. Additionally, another manifestation could be being dependent on other people. So once again, these questions of like dependency and being the one other people depend on will be very pronounced. A denial of an inheritance or some kind of friction when it comes to dealing with, you know, the resources of other is possible. Dealing with difficulty financially after getting divorced could be a manifestation of this planet, or choosing partners that perhaps take advantage of you financially, or feeling like, you know, you sort of keep getting into these situations where you are the breadwinner. You are the one who takes care of everything, and the other person just maybe even they show some kind of potential initially of being independent, but then they end up depending on you. Underneath it all, what often is hidden is the difficulty in deep sharing, because 8th house is so uncertain. It is the place in which we have to depend on what other people give us, on their favors and their attention, right? It's very unstable. And so a lot of times the individual with this placement maybe grew up in a household where the emotional attention was coming with a price tag, like you do chores and then you get a hug, or you perform good in school and then we love you. Or maybe the father was like, you know, maybe the parents got divorced. Maybe there wasn't a father there who was giving enough like emotional attention. People weren't hugging or weren't telling each other, I love you. There may have also been a lot of like friction between parents sometimes because they were having some kind of like sexual tensions. Of course, a child will not always understand it. But oftentimes it all begins in childhood, right? Like if there was some kind of issues around money, issues around sex, issues around affection, a child would learn to protect themselves and sort of build these barriers around intimacy and around closeness. And a lot of times they will be very like hidden and very kind of suppressed. There are a lot of fears potentially around, you know, being dependent on other people. So it's definitely, I don't know, I can see this as like someone who depends on others and someone who's like, I'm never going to depend on others. I have to be really independent. But ultimately there is that fear of being, you know, fear of trusting, fear of disappointment, fear of being inadequate sexually as well. And sometimes, you know, sometimes there is a like a literal sort of manifestation of someone who deals with like impotence or frigidity. But most often it's not like a physical manifestation. It's a lot more that like fear, someone who's maybe like very affectionate and loving but cannot relax in the bedroom, or someone who's actually very good in the bedroom, someone who's like worked really hard to be like sexy and passionate and, you know, learned all the arts of sexual exchanges, but then there's still some kind of wall. There's still some type of like, you know, like coldness or fears that don't let the person fully open up to like the intimate union. And a lot of times that results in the partner being really frustrated, but not always aware why they're frustrated. And so if this person then later, the person with Saturn in the 8th house, if you later find yourself in a financial battle or battle over custody, that might on some sort of subtle level be the reflection of how much frustration the partner has experienced being unable to connect. So their frustration begins to show up in this way of like, you know, they fight for money. They try to get some kind of compensation financially for what they believe they haven't received emotionally. So you know, two extremes of this behavior can show up. Someone who is overcompensating by being really promiscuous and sleeping around potentially, but not still feeling fully satisfied because they're pursuing physical expression over soulful and spiritual one. Or someone who has who blocks sex under a guise of a strong religious conviction, or saying that, it's immoral to have sex before marriage, and they protect themselves in that regard by not opening themselves up to sex. And Liz Green writes, the devil, unfortunately, is not vanquished by being told to go away. It is the light of consciousness that he cannot endure. So it's not forbidding sex. It's being conscious of the feelings and fears that it creates within you. Once in a while, you do see people who are more honest with themselves, and they're aware of their feelings, and they're aware of the need to develop, their sexuality and their trust in other people. And it may seem like I'm focusing a lot on 8th house and its connection to sex, but once again, it's more the house of exchanges with other people, and sex is just one of the exchanges that is kind of one of the most obvious ones. Another manifestation that the individual may have gone through when they were younger is maybe some kind of assault, like a physical, sexual assault. And so their fears are very much valid and very much connected to that early experience. There may be a constant theme of being let down by others and expecting, and closing off because of that. So it always begins, everything begins with self-awareness. And with Saturn, the answer always lies in, it's not going to be the other person that will heal you. It's not going to be the perfect sexual experience. It's not going to be someone who's going to be completely generous with you, because how can you expect that someone will be completely generous with you if you are struggling opening yourself up to them, right? There has to be an equal flow of energy. You cannot expect the other person to come and heal you. So being aware of your wounds, being aware of, how have your parents interacted? What kind of difficult experiences have you had? What kind of emotional scars are you carrying? And then becoming aware of the fact that it's not someone else that's going to heal you. With Saturn, the lesson is always, you must do it yourself. You must gain some control over your unconscious, understand topics of death and birth more, understand exchanges between other people more. The good news here is that more often than not, or pretty much always, people with Saturn in the 8th house have deep fascination with death and occult and interest in psychology and depth of the mind and sort of learning, right? And so in utilizing this interest and digging deep and discovering the real nature of the energy within you and the energies of other people, you can become a true master of your domain, a magician of some sorts, right? So giving power to that interest and building, sort of creating death and birth experiences within yourself so that then you can welcome them in relationships. And I'm going to leave you with another quote from Liz Green, and that is, the individual with Saturn here has a double burden on his hands, for he must not only come to terms with Saturn, who is evasive enough on his own, but he must also be willing to make the descent into Pluto's realm. So just to break away from the quote, she's talking about, death and rebirth and death and birth and darkness and sexuality and dependency, and talks about difficult topics, vulnerability. And then she says he must also be willing to make the descent into Pluto's realm if he is to find the treasure hard to attain. It may be said, however, that the person who accomplishes this possesses the key to his own immortality. So once you've discovered yourself, once you've opened yourself up to vulnerability, you are then immune to a lot of difficulty and darkness. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. For more guidance for my classes and my readings, visit anastasiadoesastrology.com. Would really appreciate any feedback, any insight you have to share. How has this show up for you? Are you dealing with sort of issues connecting intimately, connecting maybe financially or emotionally? Would love to hear that. Would love to hear more, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Bye for now.